through events in Syria?
Yep, events are definitely gathering momentum. The US is building up its troop presence and its hardware military presence in the northeast and in the south at their largest illegitimate military base at Al-Tanf on the border between Syria and Jordan and Syria and Iraq. So just a recap on what's happened. We talked last week about the ISIS terrorist attacks in southern Damascus that ended up killing 8 people, injuring more than 23, including mostly women and children. So on July the 30th at 6:53 a.m. at an altitude of 5,000 meters in the Al-Raqqa region, which is kind of central Syria, a dangerous approach by a US MQ-9 drone was again recorded. The drone came within 100 meters of the Su-34, the Russian Su-34 fighter jet, according to Brigadier General Oleg Gorinov, the head of the Russian Reconciliation Center in Syria. According to the same center, drones of the US-led international coalition violated the safety of flights in Syria 340 times during July 2023. Extraordinary number there. Going on, there have been various other terrorist attacks since the one in southern Damascus. Again, on the 31st of July in Daraa, south of Damascus, Syrian Arab Army military bus was targeted by an explosive package, killing at least one of the 4th Division soldiers on board, identified as Qasim Mohammed al-Hassan. The US and UK incubate terrorist groups in the 55-kilometer exclusion zone around the illegal US military base at Al-Tanf to carry out such attacks on Syrian military positions and convoys and on civilian infrastructure. And it can be safely assumed that Israel has also maintained contact with terror cells still active in southern Syria against Syrian military and government officials. And then moving on again, we have a couple of pictures which we can go through quite quickly of the Al-Tanf military base. This is just showing the scale of the base. It is the largest military base, illegal base inside Syria. It does have on board HIMARS artillery, which is the next photograph, which has a maximum range of around 250 kilometers. So it is potentially able to target the outskirts of Damascus from here. In the 55-kilometer exclusion zone, they are training armed groups, including ISIS. On the 31st of July, terrorist media outlets have reported that some leaders of factions in the so-called Syrian National Army, SNA, which is effectively the rebranded Free Syrian Army, among other Muslim Brotherhood-dominated gangs, have been recruiting militants from within the SNA to be posted as border guards in Al-Tanf on the Syrian-Jordanian border. Sources indicate that the recruitment is ongoing secretly and that this is a similar mission to Libya, with a salary of up to $1,000 per month. Extraordinary when you compare to the $7 to $15 wage paid to a Syrian Arab Army soldier for defending their homeland for the last 12 years, especially since inflation has increased in Syria and wages have not moved up commensurately. Just have a quick look from down to Al-Tanf. It shows how far these is maneuvering these armed groups to basically protect their military base on the border with Jordan. They are also increasing military presence in Anbar in Iraq, building an airbase, and increasing military footprint in Jordan itself. So moving on again. On July the 29th, a 27-year-old shepherd was kidnapped and 300 sheep stolen by ISIS terrorists riding motorbikes, 2 four-wheeled vehicles carrying machine guns east of Raqqa. Now, people might smile and say, well, it's just sheep. Sheep are actually one of the major resources for Syrians now, particularly as the US is occupying the majority of their agricultural resources and their oil resources in the northeast, and terrorists in the northwest are also occupying much of their agricultural resources. So these sheep and shepherds are extremely valuable to Syria. Then we have a quick look at Russian-Syrian targeting Al-Qaeda or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham bases in Idlib. Just roll the video very quickly. It doesn't have any sound. But I think what's extraordinary is if you look at this targeting of Al-Qaeda bases, what you will be met with in Western media, of course, is the white helmet propaganda that civilians and civilian infrastructure, hospitals, etc., are being targeted. You can see quite clearly there that those headquarters are in the middle of nowhere. We then have an interesting statement put out by the Syrian Foreign Minister Faisal Muqdad, who met with his Iranian counterpart Hossein Amir Abdollahian in Tehran on Monday. Muqdad came out fairly belligerently after this meeting. He said that it's better for the US army to withdraw from Syria before it's forced to do so. Very strong language from Muqdad. We haven't seen that before. Practical steps are being taken to implement the agreements reached during President Raisi's recent visit to Syria, where, of course, they discussed mutual defense treaties. We are satisfied with developments in the region as effective diplomacy between nations promises good results for the people. Those who seek to obstruct those efforts should know that the Arab peoples are tired of the authoritarian US coalition practices that seek to maintain the Zionist occupation of Arab lands, including, of course, in that the Golan territories annexed in 1967. The crimes of the US occupation in Syria cannot continue, and the Syrian people will not tolerate this indefinitely. The US occupation army must withdraw, he repeats it again, from the land it occupies. The US wants Al-Tanf region, which it occupies, to be a hub of terror organizations, including ISIS, another US proxy, to dispatch elsewhere in the region and the world, potentially, of course, Africa and Ukraine. The US and its separatist Kurdish militias continue to plunder oil and deprive the Syrian people of their resources, while Turkey, and I included their NATO member state, deprives the 2 million inhabitants of Al-Hasaka of water. And just moving in a comment from Sayed Mohammed Morandi in Iran, he states that the region is much closer to war than what most people think. The Israeli and US regimes should not underestimate the resolve of the resistance. They and their interests are vulnerable across the region. So we are seeing a definite hotting up of the conflict. We're seeing still mass mobilization of Syrian Arab army military to the north, the northeast, and the northwest. So, and we're seeing clearly an increased interference by the US when it comes to basically Russian and Syrian-controlled airspace. So I think we're heading definitely for some kind of escalation.
Vanessa, thank you very much for that. As you gave that report, what was in my mind, of course, is the parallel events in Ukraine, where we're seeing the US and NATO desperate to keep the war going so that their political aims can be achieved, which they've stated very clearly in international press, is the overthrow of the Russian president and effectively the splitting up of Russia itself. If we had trouble in one region, we could say, well, possibly it's accidental, it's to do with failures of politics at a local and international level. But when we have the same pattern happening in two very large locations in the world, this cannot possibly be an accident. I think it is so sad that we are here in 2023 and we simply can't stop these wars because of the powers that clearly want the wars to take place with an eye on assets. Okay, well, thank you for that. Let's move on to our